families had to leave their Happy Meals behind just after 6:30, directed out the back door. This eyewitness says there were about 5 or 6 people running toward the McDonald's. Turns out one of them was the 7.
So this McDonald's right here was briefly taken over by a gang after a frightening altercation with a large number of teenagers. An altercation which forced customers to flee the scene, in some cases moments after they'd sat down to eat. And even though this is what many consider to be a nice neighborhood, residents here say this sort of thing has happened before. Probably because there's never any police here and they're worried it's going to happen again.
We are just coming in from trick-or-treating with my 5-year-old. We are going inside. We get upstairs. I live on the 3rd floor. Pop, pop, pop.
Police say it happened at 6:30 on West 71st Street between Broadway and West End Avenue. A 17-year-old boy walked into a nearby McDonald's before he was taken to Cornell Medical Center to be treated for non-life-threatening injuries.
They were panicking. Yeah. Some of the guys were calling somebody were calling 911, and then like in a few minutes, the police came.
A group of teens from a nearby high school were shooting dice, playing a game of craps. There were about 15 teenagers.
There's a kind of gun epidemic happening right now, and it's exploding this week at New York City schools. The latest one today in Harlem. That makes 4 guns found this week on campuses.
4 teens were seen running away, but neighbors tell Fox 5 teens frequent the Upper West Side intersection after school and gather underneath building scaffolding.
This is like one of the busiest intersections in all of the Upper West Side, if not the entire city, and there's never a police presence.
So gang violence is slowly working its way into some of the nicest neighborhoods in New York. But what nobody's talking about is that this isn't supposed to happen anywhere here because we've got some of the strictest weapon laws in the entire country. Yet lately there seem to be incidents involving them everywhere for reasons our leaders don't seem to want to look into. Which is surprising because rising gang violence has been a growing problem on our streets for the better half of the year. With moped robbery crews causing chaos all over town, stealing phones, wallets, jewelry. Plus we've got gangs roaming Central Park and Times Square targeting tourists, which they wouldn't be able to do if they weren't armed with illegal weapons, which seems to be the main ingredient behind the rising levels of lawlessness infesting pretty much every area of town. And no community is immune from this, as weapons are even entering our schools inside kids' backpacks. Not to mention they're also finding their way into asylum seeker shelters when gangs smuggle them in covered by what look like DoorDash delivery bags, revealing that criminals, no matter who they are or where they're from, don't seem to have any issue forming gangs, arming themselves, and taking over. Which brings us to the real reason why this McDonald's was emptied out during dinner time with customers fleeing for their lives. The bad guys in our city fear nothing because they know our legal system sees them as good guys who just need a second chance and won't lock them up. And although criminal possession of a weapon here is a felony, nobody can become a felon if our city refuses to prosecute the armed gang members it's constantly arresting and releasing. And while this progressive justice initiative may indeed balance out past legal wrongdoings in the eyes of some, as you're about to see, it's allowing armed gang members to commit types of crime completely foreign to neighborhoods like this one. So this here is the McDonald's where all of this happened, and to be honest with you, this is like the last place where you'd expect this kind of thing to go down. We're in the Upper West Side on Broadway and Amsterdam. We're steps from the Museum of Natural History. There's a whole bunch of cafes over here, other restaurants, and there's a lot of high-end apartments. It's like a neighborhood for rich people, to be honest with you. And although residents say this kind of thing isn't supposed to be the new normal here, it is.
A group of teens from a nearby high school were shooting dice, playing a game of craps. There were about 15 teenagers. Eyewitnesses say they heard 3 shots. A 17-year-old.
So here you have an event that's extremely frightening, and although it ended inside the McDonald's here with all of the customers having to be evacuated, it actually started right around the corner, underneath some of the scaffolding on this beautiful block with expensive apartments on both sides of the street. Probably in this area where you have a business that's been closed for quite some time. And apparently the group that was here was around 15 teenagers, and they were approached by 4 assailants, and after those assailants decided to make their move, the entire group scattered. Reports indicate some members of the group attempted to enter some of the nearby apartment buildings, but were stopped by doormen, which is why they eventually ended up inside this McDonald's here trying to get help. And what's crazy is both sides of the block are blanketed with security cameras. There's footage of what happened here. But in spite of that, police have made 0 arrests, and they recovered evidence indicating these criminals used their weapon about 4 times. And it's incredibly frightening to think that whoever started this attack is still out there on the loose and is possibly still armed. But what's even more frightening are the events that transpired inside this McDonald's after the group went inside.
A Halloween night treat at McDonald's was cut short tonight. Families in their costumes had to leave their Happy Meals behind just after 6:30, directed out the back door. He says there were about 5 or 6 people running toward the McDonald's. His friends took off their shirts to make a tourniquet for his.
That's really crazy. Apparently this place was packed because it was dinner time and customers had to be evacuated. Some of them were little kids. People left their food on the tables, Happy Meals, and just walked away.
You're not!
But if you ask neighbors who live around here and know this area well, they'll tell you that there typically aren't enough police here at all for the large crowds that seem to gather here all the time. Loitering here is common. You've got people that spend quite a bit of time here all the time. Plus, you've got a number of affordable eateries around here that cater to a younger crowd. And there also seem to be a large number of delivery bikes that are perpetually parked here. And they will tell you that this neighborhood has been about this close away from some sort of crazy incident for a long time now, and they want something done about it. Basically, what you have here are the makings of an environment that lends itself to chaos. Yet steps have not been taken from a public safety standpoint to ensure that doesn't happen. Which is pretty crazy because usually when a neighborhood gets neglected from a safety standpoint, it's usually a neighborhood in Brooklyn or in Queens, not typically Manhattan, much less the Upper West Side.
Neighbors tell Fox 5 teens frequent the Upper West Side intersection after school and gather underneath the building scaffolding. They're calling for more security in the area to keep other school children safe. But so far, they say, those calls have gone unanswered.
This is like one of the busiest intersections in all of the...
So I just talked to one of the local business owners around here, and he told me that this area right here under this scaffolding is where this gang of teenagers is always hanging out. He says that they're here from 9 in the morning until like 6 p.m. in the evening some days, school days. And they're always hanging out over here doing stuff, which is right across the street from the McDonald's. And apparently the building always complains about their presence over here at the abandoned storefront, but what happens is the police show up, tell people to move on, and they do, but then they come back. And the resident on the news is right. This is one of the busiest intersections in town, for sure. You have a number of high-traffic businesses over here, plus you've got a major subway station, and this is the kind of place that you'd think would have a greater security presence in general just because of how busy it normally is. And apparently what you have here is a situation where there has been criminal activity that has manifested itself and existed out in the open, and after complaints, it's still there. And the consequence of allowing that is that eventually it escalates, and we have a situation in a part of town like this that nobody really thought was coming. But to be honest with you, escalation is the natural progression of any type of criminal activity. Look at this, with the moped gangs, we've got them riding around stealing all kinds of stuff from people, and the amounts of money that they're taking and the types of crimes that they're committing just keep going up and up. It started with simple snatch and grabs on sidewalks where the moped riders would ride by and take something from someone, and then they started parking their mopeds outside expensive restaurants and walking into the restaurants with weapons and telling people to take their jewelry and their phones and just dump them into a pillowcase, and then they escaped. And the recent incident that took place in this McDonald's, that was the result of teenage gang activity, which is the logical escalation from adult gang activity. And what's worse is that we've got warning signs flashing all around us in many of our schools that this sort of thing is only gonna get worse. So behind me, you've got your typical New York City high school, which is supposed to be a safe space for our most precious resource. But our schools here, they are turning into the opposite of that because there are now high levels of weapons being brought into these places in spite of the fact that you've got police and in some cases metal detectors. And inside the backpacks of some students, you'll find things that shouldn't be in a school at all. And if that weren't happening, we wouldn't be seeing some of the types of teenage gang violence that have been taking over the news lately.
There's a kind of gun epidemic happening right now, and it's exploding this week at New York City schools. The latest one today in Harlem. That makes 4 guns found this week on campuses, reported by 4 of the 5 boroughs.
You know, all of this explosion of violence and danger inside places like this, none of it should be a surprise when you consider that our legal system has allowed danger and violence to perpetrate the adult world of our city for quite a long time. We shouldn't be surprised at all that this is now filtering down into people who are in school. And when you've got adults bringing weapons where they shouldn't, getting caught and getting arrested with the charges either being dropped, dismissed, or downgraded, how can we not expect that to have some sort of effect on kids? And we shouldn't be at all surprised that kids are emulating what they see and hear adults doing. And what's really frightening about this is these weapons, they are making their way inside schools, walking right past school safety in some cases because not all schools have metal detectors installed. And apparently at the school on the news, police only found out about the weapon in question when students reported it to them, which is pretty scary when you think about it because these students could suffer repercussions from these gang members who are their classmates. But what's really frightening are all the things that had to go wrong in order for kids to think that it was a good idea to bring something wrong into a place like this. Like, how does that thought enter their head that they think that they should just put this in their book bag with the other stuff that they're supposed to bring, like their lunch? What is their home environment like where they thought this was a good idea when they were getting ready in the morning? And what are they expecting to happen to them after they leave their school? Are they even in a safe environment? If you've got people who are being threatened when they're at school with something that could happen to them afterwards, it would make sense why this kind of thing is happening, unfortunately. And then the other question is, with the strict laws that we have here in this city regarding ownership of these types of items, how does a kid even get their hands on one?
Guys, make sure you take everything out of your pockets, put everything inside your book bag.
The safety measure comes after police say a school safety agent discovered a gun on a 17-year-old and 15-year-old student around lunchtime yesterday.
It's definitely concerning.
At the Percy's.
So if inside of a place like this that's supposed to help kids, we've got stuff like this going on, no one is going to benefit from being inside here. It's not going to educate people. It's not going to help them get ready for life on their own in society. And although we don't necessarily know where each and every single weapon that gets brought to a place like this comes from, when we see high levels of gang activity taking place outside of our schools, it should only make sense that that activity makes its way inside of them at some point. An extremely frightening proposition in a city that's already got a problem dealing with crime it can't seem to handle. But this will give us some insight on why weapons are so prevalent. Look at this. Weapon-related convictions are way down. And this is not a new phenomenon at all. It's been happening since 2021. That year, the NYPD arrested 4,400 people on weapons-related charges, yet 1,200 of those people either had their cases dropped or dismissed or the charges downgraded. Which is pretty crazy because if you get caught with something you're not supposed to have, that's a 3.5-year minimum prison sentence. You're going away, and it's a felony, but not if it gets dropped or downgraded. If it doesn't exist anymore, you're not going to suffer any consequences for what you did. And when this is how things function, the criminal underworld doesn't get the message that they need to stop at all what they're doing. Instead, they just keep on doing it because they keep on getting away with it. And look at this. Everything is down. Felony cases resulting in convictions, that happens less often than it used to. Even misdemeanor cases resulting in convictions. And look at the number of felony cases that were just straight up dropped. Oh, no, we're not going to go after that person for the felony thing that they did, which could be weapon possession. Here's another biggie. Look at the number of misdemeanors that resulted in a jail sentence. Look at that. Way down. Now, I understand that we live in a city where we have realized that maybe locking people up for nonviolent offenses could have some harms attached to it, but if nobody gets in trouble for doing anything, how can we not expect all types of crime not to do this?
Now is the time to ratchet up our efforts to make sure this doesn't go forward into the school year.
Robert Boyes is a retired NYPD chief of detectives who says the police department's school safety division is critical.
A lot of that is done through talking with students who have fears, and also social media.
He says more resources are needed, like scanning.
So here we have a retired police officer who says that there needs to be more policing, more school safety-related initiatives in places like this, even though many parents who are very progressive don't want their kids in a place that's full of metal detectors and armed officers. Sometimes to keep people safe, that's what you gotta do, and right now our schools are very unsafe. And if our schools are so unsafe that we have to turn them into minimum security prisons in order to get them to function properly, properly, perhaps that brings up a healthy conversation about what these places are actually trying to accomplish in the first place, and how exactly they're going to go about accomplishing it in an environment that is now overrun with gang activity and where people have very dangerous things inside their personal belongings. But this brings us to one of the reasons this type of violence is out of control in the first place. Apparently, weapon-related incidents here used to be a lot lower when the NYPD used plainclothes teams of officers to go after criminals and surprise them and catch them. But those teams have all been disbanded in the name of reducing over-policing in various communities throughout our city. And the reason our schools are now turning out like this is because we've got a bad combination of a few very volatile ingredients. Not only have we decided that we're not going to prosecute the crime that we do encounter in this city, well, the police who go out and arrest criminals, we've decided that we're going to decrease the number of tools that they have to work with. So we're putting people in danger, we're not prosecuting crime, and we're not prosecuting people who do things that deserve a 3-year minimum sentence. What do we honestly expect to happen? And what do we expect kids to do when they see adults getting away with all of this stuff? Is that the problem that we've got in the city? Would cracking down on offenses like misdemeanors and felonies send a signal to our criminal underworld and anybody who wants to emulate these people and try to be like them that crime is not the way to go in this part of the country? What do you think about that? Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.